Brother Odom. I think we should still be on 30, 34. Well, I don't see him. Well, we're going to page 34, but I'm going back to try to bring us up because we haven't been basically keeping up. So we just get a review real quick and move on to page 34. Okay. Because we're following in the idea of what is that process of how we reconcile ourselves to one another, how we maintain unity in the body. And so it's like really want to capture the one mindset where God talks to us from the old to the new. Jesus is that one that bridges the gap for us. And so as Jesus bridges the gap from the old to the new, and you'll see a lot of those same principles that are present in the old is also present in the new, that God used among the children of Israel. It was good for them, and guess what? God determined that it's good for us too. So we have to abide in the same. And so since we have to abide in the same, we can all still reap those same rich rewards. And so here, as he talks about the process, one of the things I want to remind us, like you said, the Lord's house was never meant to be a place where there was confusion, hostility, division under the Old Testament, nor under the New Testament. And so how we live together, we're a family and we have to be able to live together and grow together. But recognizing we're different people, we come from different places, we come from even different ideologies. And so how do we bridge all of these things together where that we can be, as Paul told the Corinthian church, to be of the same mind and of the same speech. In order to get there, it takes some work, and that work that we have to do is to sit at the feet of Jesus through the Word and allow Him to instruct us, and then we must embrace that very thing. And so when we go back and look at this as we read all the way through to the page 34, then we'll come back and talk about that. So I need somebody to start reading the process of reconciliation from the old to the new. Yeah, page 33.
The Lord's house was never meant to be a place of confusion, hostility, and division under the Old Testament, nor under the New Testament. The Lord addresses the issue of dealing with personal offenses in giving of the law, and here in Matthew 18:15 through 20. When we examine the scriptures closely, we can see God's attitude toward disunity among his people. Under the law, there were several moral and ceremonial laws given to address disputes, quarrels among neighbors, and false witnesses. The scripture says, "You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. In righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go about as a talebearer among the people, nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor, and not bear sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge says, one witness shall not rise against a man concerning any iniquity or any sin that he commits. By mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, the matter shall be established. If a false witness rises against any man to testify against him of wrongdoing, then both men in the controversy shall stand before the Lord, before the priest and the judges who serve in those days. And the judges shall make careful inquiry. Indeed, if the witness is a false witness, who is testified falsely against his brother, then you shall do to him as he thought to have done to his brother. So you shall put away the evil from among you. Deuteronomy 19:15-19. This process will remove the element of disunity among the people of God. Deuteronomy 19:20, which reads, don't miss the point. Don't miss the point here. It is the will of God that his people address their differences in righteousness, not like the world.
Okay, now, yeah, I need somebody to read the New Testament part. New Testament has addressed reconciliation between brethren in a similar manner.
The New Testament addresses reconciliation between brethren in a similar manner. In Matthew 18:15, Christ uses the phrase, if your brother trespass against you. The word trespass here from the Greek means to sin against. Now, when Jesus spoke these words, the disciples were still under the law. And however, Jesus was teaching them the process of reconciliation in the kingdom. It is here that the process is clearly spelled out for us. The course of action taken in restoring our fallen brother, sister, must be done in love and with much prayer and care. There may be situations when the offender does see the trespass
Doesn't see the trespass.
and is unwilling to resolve the issue. Saying sorrow doesn't produce the result we were hoping for. However, we must continue in prayer, asking God for guidance as we work through the process, and ask God to help us to find the right words that, when spoken with grace, will penetrate the heart of the offender. Colossians 4:6. However, for some, facing their offender is a difficult test, and many find avoidance of the person as an easier course of action. And however, this isn't the procedure outlined by Jesus. We must bear in mind that the fallen is lost until she is restored. Regeneration be known to all men, the Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:5-7. And don't miss the point here. The Lord will always give us the courage and the strength to do what is right.
Okay, thank you. Now, in this section here, the process, as we look at the process, unfolds in the New Testament. And now, hopefully you can remember, I often mention the Old Testament, New Testament in this regard, that the Old Testament is the Word of God concealed. The New Testament is the Word of God revealed. In other words, the Old Testament was a shadow, it had a veil that they could not look to the end. In other words, they could not see where God was taking them. God had to guide them by the hand because he knew that probably that people like to get out ahead of God. So instead of God giving them all the answers, he kept a veil so that they cannot see to the end where God was taking them. but God had showed it to Abraham. Remember last Sunday when I mentioned that God had preached the gospel to Abraham. Abraham knew what the will of God was. He saw the Christ. He saw all these things through the spiritual eye that God gave him to see the children of Israel in bondage for some 430 years, to see them come out of that bondage, and to see what God was saying, that at the time he told Abraham this, there was people who was righteous in the land. God could not give them a land where righteous people are. God was not going to inflict the righteous for their sake. That's not the kind of God that he is. But when they turn and begin to live evil lives, then God will turn that land over to the children that were living in unrighteous covenant with him. And so when you begin to see the process, Abraham first goes out. You see that in Abraham time. When Abraham goes out to deliver Lot and those that was in the city of Sodom, and the city of Sodom and Gomorrah was overtaken by the 5 kings. Abraham joined himself to kings, and they went and took Lot and the family back. And on the way back, they came and met a man named Melchizedek, who was the high priest of God. Now imagine this here. This man is the high priest of God. Abraham did not know him. God didn't need Abraham to know him until Abraham needed to know him. And when Abraham met him, Abraham established with him the covenant of tithing. Abraham gave him a tenth of all that he brought back from the spoils. That's where tithing was introduced and was given to the children of Israel. Tithing was not given to Christians because we are above tithing. We are in the area of love. We give out of love and not out of command. So God teaches us to be generous with our hearts, not with our resources of telling us for 10% of this, because we don't understand the specifics how God did it in Israel. And the specifics that God did it in Israel when it came to the tithing was that you had to give a tenth of everything you had. So if you had sheep, if you had cattle, if you had a winery, if you had servants, if whatever you had that made money, whatever that thing that produced the value, God owned 10% of that. So for you, you may be giving 70% of what you have, because that's the vastness of your blessing, of your border. And somebody else may only have 2 things, and so they're giving 20% because that 10% of each one leads to 20%, because that's what God has laid upon them. Remember, God never lays upon us more than what? Than we can bear. And so, but God is just. So we can't bring that same philosophy into today's homology when we talk about dealing with God and giving to God, recognizing that God has given greater to us than what he gave to the children of Israel. He gave them land. But what God gave us, he gave us eternal salvation. So, and so we owe God more. We owe God ourselves. That's why Corinthians, Paul said, now look at it, if you tell the truth about the matter, you're not your own. You've been bought with a price. So we don't belong to ourselves, we belong to the Lord. And so therefore, we are now the temple of God, and we have to honor God as such. And so those are, that's the balance where you see us progression, or the process moving forward into a people that understand God in a greater way and appreciate God in a greater way. But here in this text here, when we look at this, he helps us to understand that when God is bringing these people out of slavery, okay, and when folks come out of slavery, they tend to be like those who enslaved them. They learn from them, they learn their way, they learn their language, they learn their mannerism, their customs. It's just as our ancestors did. They brought our ancestors out of Africa. They knew nothing about the colonizers or European ways, but the Europeans took them and taught them their language, taught them their customs, where they say our ancestors lived in huts and all of that there, and dressed very loosely. And they got there, they learned how to wear pants and shirts and ties and wigs and all the kind of things that they wore. They learned to talk. They learned the custom of law and mannerism that those who had rule over them. And as a result, we became a part of those cultures. And so we can't go back because we don't know what to go. We don't have nothing to go back to, do we? We are what we are. We are what we have become to be. So the children of Israel were the same way in Egypt. 430 years they lived that way. And so they had the ways of the Egyptians. So God had to teach them who they were and bring them out of that. So he gave them a law. So when we see Galatians 3, that's what Galatians 3 really talks about, that God gave them the law because of transgression. They were sinners. They weren't like their patriarchal fathers. They didn't have a covenant relationship with God. So God had to give them something to teach them how to conduct themselves. So here God is doing the same thing with us. They're coming into a relationship with him. How do we conduct ourselves with God? What is that process by which God is able to receive us? God looks at us and say, well, I'm judging you on how you treat one another. How you treat one another will determine if you can come to me, that we could have a covenant relationship. If you can't be right with each other, you definitely can't be right with God, can we? And so here he shows them that if behaviors are being taken place, if a brother is deceptive and saying things about a brother that is false, he said, I don't accept a tit for tat. I don't accept tit for tat. You say, they say. There must be witness. Out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, that every word be established. So therefore, if something comes up, no one of you can charge the other with evil. So if you saw me sin, you can come to me personally. You and me can talk. But you can't go out then and say, I'm disturbed. I saw Brother Sykes doing this right here. That's talebearing. Now you're spreading gossip. Now you're doing something that God said do not do. Why? Because you're bringing open shame to the house of God. See, God controls everything in this house. And when you throw the door open, you give what? The devil an occasion and to come in. And if you get a devil an occasion to come in, you think he won't come in? Or will he come in? It was, he's going to run in. He's going to run in. And he's going to do all he can to tear the place up. And so that's how God begins to tell us. And so we as a people, we have a lot of growing that we need to do because we're not accustomed to God ways as we are to the human way, to the human condition. We grew up in communities where, we use that old mentality, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and all of this stuff, under the law. And we have to understand that that law is not given to us as Christians. Paul told Timothy in the pastoral letters in 1 Timothy 1:9, he said, this law is not for the righteous, but for the unrighteous. So the 10 Commandments is for the unrighteous. If you say, well, I'm trying to keep the 10 Commandments, then you're not trying to keep covenant with God. God didn't give you that to keep covenant with him. He gave that to the ungodly so that they know how to behave themselves outside of covenant with God. God has law in all the land for the ungodly and for the godly. And so when we look at it, we say, well, how is that true? Go back to the garden. Didn't God create the law of marriage? And is the law of marriage, was that only to the righteous or was that to all men? All men. So he has universal laws. And then he has that covenant law that he has with those that are in covenant agreement with him through the gospel, that he has promised eternal salvation to those. But outside of that, people have to learn that, Hanara said they have to stay in their lane. See, if you're not going to be a Christian, then your lane is the 10 Commandment law. You ought to do no murder. You're not to covet your neighbor's wife. Those laws are there for a purpose. And so when we get to Romans 12, he tells us, hey, this law is meaningful because God has taken a position among his children. And that is, God says that vengeance is mine, and I shall repay it. I stand in the position to distribute punishment. Judgment and punishment is mine to do, not yours to do. Ours to do is to follow God's mandate. And so here he begins to tell them how he would have us to live our lives together. So Jesus, he bridges the old and the new. The kingdom, in other words, kingdom teaching. And so that's why he says here that Christ uses the phrases, if thy brother trespass against you. The word trespass here from the Greek means to sin against you. Now, when Jesus spoke these words, the disciple was still under the law. Remember, Jesus is living under the law, so he's addressing them under the law, but he's also making kingdom preparation because he's telling them the kingdom is at hand. So he's preparing them to enter into the kingdom of God. This is how you're going to conduct yourself in the kingdom of God. And so he's reminding them to bring them along because even at this point, as Jesus did with them, they have forgotten. Look at Peter. Peter asks that question. How many times should I forgive my brother who trespassed against me? Peter, why are you asking the Lord that? You should know. You say you are Peter, in Acts chapter 10, declares himself to be a Pharisaic Jew. And a Pharisaic Jew is one is the strictest of Jews. They follow the law in the strictest manner. So if Peter was one who followed the law in the strictest manner, shouldn't he have known how to treat his brother? But nevertheless, Peter is asking God that, Lord, that said, how should I treat my brother? Should I forgive him 3 times, 4 times? What if I be real generous and forgive him 7 times? And Jesus looked at him and said, 7 times 7. So Peter has to learn that God's intention is to not hold anything against your brother. But if need be, you allow your brother to have the greater benefit. You have to be like Abraham was. Look at Abraham and Lot. When the herdsmen began to have conflict and brought conflict home to Abraham and Lot, Abraham told Lot, he said, let us not have strife among ourselves, for we be what? Brethren. And so he gave leave to Lot to choose whatever the best he wanted. Here, I surrender. Whatever you choose, I'll accept. I won't fight you over it. But see, today, we will fight each other over stuff because we don't have that same attitude as the one that we declared to be our father of faith. Father Abraham, we said Abraham is our father in faith. So we follow his mannerism. We will conduct ourselves in the same way. You would think that Peter and those of that day would understood this and conducted their way. That's why that whole conversation in John chapter 8 takes place, that whole discourse that Jesus had with them when he's telling them, he said, y'all don't know who I am. And because y'all don't know who I am, y'all can't hear me. I'm one that have come down the line, and I have had a relationship with all those before you. I've had a relationship with all the patriarchal fathers. I've had a relationship with all the prophets. And what did y'all do? Y'all have denied the Father's teaching, and you have killed the prophets. And when they said that, when Jesus told them that, they got mad at Jesus. They did Jesus like the Corinthian church did Paul. And Paul said, now I'm telling you the truth. Do I become your enemy because I tell you the truth? So we as people, we have to learn how to accept each other in truth. Truth don't all the time feel warm and fuzzy, does it? But it needs to be there in order for righteousness to stand and prevail. Truth has to be there. Without it, it cannot be there. And if we have not righteousness, then we can't be part of God's family because God's going to judge the world in righteousness. Yes.
Why is it that then, you can probably answer this question or anybody, that when you tell some of your brothers or sisters that there's a problem, they fly off the handle?
Because what he says here, what is that at? He says penetrates the heart. Okay, yeah. However, this isn't the procedure outlined by Jesus. We must bear in mind that the fallen is lost until they're restored. We must not allow ourselves to be anxious. Oh, that's gotta go out for the. Something about some people can't accept it.
It says there may be situations when the offender doesn't
see the trespass.
And is unwilling to resolve the issue, or saying sorry doesn't produce the result that we were hoping for. However,
wait a minute, right there. Yeah, wait, right there. What he's simply saying is some people don't see themselves standing in the wrong. I can say this to you, and I feel I'm right. As long as I feel I'm right, no, I'm not going to apologize. No, I'm not going to be humble. No, I'm not going to accept, stepping back and surrender my position to you to allow you to be, for me to be the little person so you can be the bigger person. No, I'm going to stand my ground. And so when you have that attitude like that, and it persists in places, and I don't know, we may not never see that here at Carolina Avenue. We might see it at Carolina Avenue. Because we are human, and I know sometimes in time past, I remember among us brothers, we've had some heated discussions. And in those heated discussions, we've had folks that say, well, this is just how I see it. Another person would say, well, how you see it is wrong. Well, now you're charging one person with wrong, and the Bible saying in that environment, they both are wrong because what? If you have an ought against your brother, that's not the place to do it among the brethren. You go to that brother and say, hey, can I talk to you? And like the scripture said, if he will not hear you because of this, he sees himself, I don't have to answer to you. I've been in this house longer than you. I have, what is it when you're on the job longer than somebody, what do they call that? Seniority. Basically, I have the concept of seniority. I've been here, you're a newcomer. You can't come and tell me anything. You know, because we do that. When I was on the job, I dealt with people like that all the time. I have seniority, and I'm not going to let y'all just say anything. You're not going to give me that position because I've been here. You better give that to somebody that hadn't been here. And all of this just come crowded in because of that personality, you know, that person had that pride. I've been here, therefore I'm entitled. I'm entitled to think. I'm entitled to behave. And you have to accept me like this right here. And when that comes in, now you at what they call that loggerhead, because now you just butting heads with each other, and you walk away feeling some hostility towards that person. And the text tells us that we are not to have this kind of hostility, because hostility turns to anger, and anger turns to grudges, you know. And all that, as it goes on, that hate, that anger turns into sin. And Paul tells the church, let not the sun go down, let not the wrath go down, let not the sun come down upon your wrath. If you're angry, don't let that sun set with that in your heart. You know, you go and you deal with that. But like I said, if you go to a brother, you're trying to deal with him, and he just throw his hands up and like, how did children used to do? Talk to the hand. You know, what are you to do? He said, if they won't hear you, go get another brother. Someone that they respect. Say like here, if it's among those who have been here a long time, and say, you know, there's something that happened between one of the senior brothers. Say something happened between you and Brother Glenn. And then who's been here as long as Brother Glenn, Brother Jesse? You might go say, well, I don't get Brother Jesse. Brother Glenn, Brother Jesse has a good rapport. And I'm going to see if Brother Jesse can talk to Brother Glenn and help Brother Glenn out. Or vice versa. Well, I have an issue with Brother Jesse. Okay, I'm going to talk to Brother Glenn. But Brother Glenn has a good rapport with Brother Jesse. So now you tell Brother Glenn. And then you let Brother Glenn mediate, become that mediator to try to reconcile peace. But if that can't happen, then Brother Glenn now has a greater responsibility, because now he's been made privy to it, and he's standing in a place where if he show respect to person, that Peter says there in Acts chapter 10, verse 35, when God taught him on the rooftop about how don't look at people the same way, don't look down on people. You know that saying that we've heard years ago, don't look down on a man unless you're looking down to do what? Lift him up. Peter was looking down on the Gentile. That's why some historians say it took Peter 40 years. Now the gospel had been preached in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, all over. And Philip and all them out there preaching, but they say, okay, only Peter had the keys. God gave Peter the keys, but Peter won't go to the Gentiles because Peter never had any dealing with the Gentiles. Peter felt so bad about Jews who was half-breeds, Samaritans, that Peter would go 3 days around their town. He'll go 3 days out of the way to avoid seeing one of those Samaritans. I don't want to see a Samaritan. I don't want a Samaritan to talk to me. I don't want a Samaritan to breathe on me. I don't want a Samaritan to walk in the same footsteps or the same dirt I walk on. So Peter and those guys would go 3 days out of the way to avoid one. You know how drastic that is? They go 3 days out of the way to avoid a person. That's how those Pharisee Jews did the Samaritans. And so when it came to the Gentiles, they had no dealing with the Gentile whatsoever. Now what they would do, they would take the lowest person in their community, what they consider the sinners of the Jews. You know, the sinners of the Jews were those publicans. They had publicans in the community, and they would talk to the sinners of the Jews. Remember, like Zacchaeus, he was a sinner of the Jews because he was a publican. Now they would talk to him and tell him, and now he would go and deal with the Gentiles and talk to them. It's all right because he's already a sinner. We don't regard him much about nothing. So Zacchaeus was the man to go do that. And so that's why when Jesus came and told Zacchaeus, I got to stay at your house. They said, well, what in the world Jesus doing with that sinner? He's a publican. He's the worst among us. So now you got this, you know, you begin to see how their personality, how their mindsets were. And Jesus got to deal with it. Jesus said, wait a minute. Y'all are all messed up. Every last one of y'all are descendants of Abraham. But you have decided to put each other in a box. You have decided, okay, the Pharisees, they're the righteous one. The Sadducees, and they're like here and there and nowhere. We just tolerate them because we need their numbers. And then you got these publicans over here. You got three groups of people. You got the righteous ones, you got the ones that just hanging out in the middle, which was the Pharisees, because they didn't believe much about nothing. And then you had your sinners of the Jews, Zacchaeus, and those who were publicans that did the bidding of the Roman Empire, so to speak. And then you had those totally outcast Samaritans. They're like the dirt of the earth. And then you had the dogs of the Gentiles. So everybody had a box. Jesus had to fix that. And now Jesus played along with that mentality. You can see him playing along with that mentality. When that Syrophoenician woman came, remember the one that had the daughter that was near dead? And she asked him, he said, wait a minute. You're not even a Jew of no degree. He said, it's not meat to give the children meat to the dogs. See, why should I bless you? Y'all like dogs to us. And that woman told Jesus, said, yeah, Lord, but the dogs eat the crumb that fall from their master's table. There's a place in that's what she told Jesus, I don't care what you said in the house. There's a place for the dog in the house too. The dogs eat the crumb that fall on the floor. You remember that rich man that left his brother Lazarus laying out at the gate and let the dogs in the house eat the crumbs that fell from his fingers? And the dogs went and licked Lazarus' wound, did more for him than his own brother did for him. But the Bible said by and by, both of them brothers had to die. And then after they died, then that rich brother decided, oh, had I only known about this place. Abraham, send somebody back and tell my brothers that God's law is real. Don't come to, that's the wrong time to learn your lesson. When Lazarus was at your doorstep, that's when you should have learned the lesson. And so when we're together, that's when we learn our lesson. You don't have all against you. You don't want to lay down. You don't want death catch you. And sin is in the midst. And so that's why Jesus said, if both of y'all are loggerheads and you feel you're right, every time you turn around, both of you show up at church, and he go to this side of the church, he go to that side of the church. And you want to come and give your offering. Here's my collect. Jesus said, you better not. He said, y'all better get together first and reconcile if that offering you give means nothing. Your sin remains. As long as sin is remain, you got a problem. And that's why Jesus told those folks in John chapter 8, he said, what's going on with y'all attitude, y'all way of thinking? He said, y'all are in sin. He said, and if you die in your sin, where I am, you can't come. He said, because y'all got minds like the devil. Y'all mind is full of devilish stuff, and you want to hold your devilish ways, but you want to come in and be right with God. How can you be right with God with devilish attitude? Yes.
I love this book. Just that one part, to answer your question, part of it says we must continue in prayer. But then it says this, asking God for guidance as we work through the process.
Mm-hmm.
That means it doesn't end. No. And if you started to come to somebody and then they flew off the handle, that was part of the process. So you still working on it. It doesn't mean, well, I tried and I'm gonna walk away, because the process doesn't end there. And I think that it makes you better that if somebody flew off the handle but you still trying, and of course you're always going to God, but you're still trying, and then that comfort in your heart says, listen, I'm not gonna let this go. I'm still gonna try, but you're not negative, because it says here you're still working through the process.
Yeah.
And the process includes you.
Yeah.
But of course, you're praying on it and asking God to help you do this. And with God and you together, it's going to work itself out.
Yeah, because anger blinds both people's minds. Anger, both of us, our minds are blind because of the anger we have or the dislike we have for each other. Our minds are blind. And the devil going, oh, goody, goody, goody. And Paul told the Corinthians, he said, if our gospel be hid, it's hid to them that are blind, that God, this word, are blindly minded, they might not see the gospel or understand the gospel. And so that's where the devil sets at. He sets in that place where he could do that. But we as Christians, we have to strive for a right relationship with God at all times. That's righteousness. Striving for that right relationship is an individual responsibility and a collective responsibility of the family to bring peace and keep peace in the house of God. And so we all have to work at it. So like I said, it's that process, and Jesus addresses that. And then you see a real application of this in the gospel. When you look at what happens with Paul. Paul is that new Christian. Remember, Paul is that new Christian there in Acts chapter 9. He has met Jesus on the Damascus Road. Paul is that Pharisee the Jew prior. He is Saul, the Pharisee the Jew. And he's riding on his steed, and he's righteous, and he's bringing vindication upon anything that he feels is contrary to the way of God. contrary to the way of Judaism. God gave us Judaism and nothing else. Whoever this Jesus was, whoever this Christ was, he's an enemy of God, and I'm going to tear his house down. And that's what he was doing. And so when Jesus met him on the Damascus road, Jesus asked a question. He told him, he said, Saul, it's hard for thee to kick against the prick. What does that mean? It's hard for you to fight against what's the truth. He said, you're a blind man, and you're fighting at the wind, thinking you're making progress. Can you imagine that image? You think you see, and you fight. But what you're fighting is not what you should be fighting. You're tearing down what you should be building up. And if you tear that down, then you have nothing to stand on. And you look and say, well, why did I do that? Because you didn't understand the truth. Ignorance caused us to do things that we ought not do. And that's where Saul was. And so God had to blind him so he could open his eyes so he could see. And so when Paul, that new Christian, comes back from his journey into Arabia, and he meets Barnabas, everybody's afraid of him. Barnabas becomes that Christian brother that looks at Paul and says, I knew who you were before you became Paul, but because I know God, I'm able to accept you. Not because of my person, but because I know God, I'm able to accept you. And because I'm able to accept you, I'm going to embrace you. And as he embraced Paul, he began to love Paul and understand Paul. And they did a great missionary journey together. And they picked up John Mark along the way with them. But then when they got to Antioch, see, your faith brings challenges. Now, Paul experiencing now, as Paul, he's experiencing what he was dishing out as Saul. And John Mark sees this here. He sees the heated anger of these Jews. And John Mark breaks camp. He said, hey, it done got too hot in the kitchen. And so when he left, that made Paul mad. Paul said, how are you going to abandon us in the heat of the battle? You run off, but that happens at war. You got some people can stay in the heat of the battle, and some people can't. You know? And so even when Brother Glenn was being trained, Brother Glenn, did y'all understand y'all had men among y'all ranks, some that was be able to stand in the heat of the battle and some that would? But what would they tell, what was your responsibility in that matter? When you're in the heat of the battle, could you do let that person that run off and leave? Or what was you to do? You had to stay and fight. So Paul said, I'm staying and fight, and I'm short one man. And so now it's time to go prepare for our second journey. And Barnabas said, let's go get Mark. And Paul said, not today, not tomorrow, not never. But remember who Barnabas is. Barnabas, he is a compassionate comforter. He is a conciliatory person. He's a person that moderates and brings folks together. So as angry as Paul was at John Mark and refused to take him, he said, Barnabas, I love you, but ain't nothing you can say to me. And we got folks in the church like that. I love you, but ain't nothing you can say to me. And in that situation, you know what happened? Barnabas said, okay, I tell you what we're going to do. Because now it's four of us brothers standing here. You told him how you felt. And now you brought somebody else in. You told us how you felt. But guess what? The work got to be done. So this is what we're going to do. Barnabas brings the deal. Barnabas said, look, you take Paul, you take Silas. I'll take John Mark. And we're going to continue the mission. And they continue the mission. And over time, Paul's heart began to soften against John Mark. So by the time he takes on the protege Timothy, and he writes his pastoral letters to Timothy, guess what he tells Timothy? He tells Timothy, bring John Mark, for he's profitable unto me. See how God over time can bridge that? It's something about the agape love of God that's able to break down walls, but as Brother Odom said, there is a process. Love has to work its way into and permeate. Then it brings about a change. But until then, people are mad with each other. And so tonight we look at this lesson, and he, like you say, he lays out those 7 things that the Jews were not to do to one another, how they were to treat each other, how were they to judge each other in righteousness. Our judgment, see, and when we judge one another in church, it has to be in righteousness. The Bible does not teach us not to judge, but it teaches not to falsely judge one another. When we teach, we have to judge each other in righteousness because issues are going to come up among people. Issues come up among husbands and wives. Issues come up among siblings on it. I remember my sister used to fight over simple stuff as a sweater, simple stuff as a makeup kit. You used all my foundation. I'm like, oh, I mean, sometimes they get so heated, they be at each other, tearing each other up in there. And mama had to bring the rod of correction. And that put everybody in the right perspective. Mama didn't care who was right or wrong. When the rod comes out, everybody gets some. And it brings peace. But mom had to do that. And so it happens to everybody. And over time, after they lick their wounds and everything, they get all right again. I wish the community was like that today. Young folks get that way today, they go get a gun and shoot each other. That's just the worst of things. Yes, Brother Norris.
Oh, no.
Okay. So we can see how critical it is for those that's in the spiritual house of God to be spiritual. That's the only way the world can see Christ. Because if we act like the world, we get mad and act like the world, then the world only see a reflection of themselves. Remember we were talking about in the past, we were talking about that man in the mirror? What reflection do we see? Do we see the world in us, or do we see Jesus in us? And we're allowing Jesus to become real in us so that we can be able to walk in the light as he's in the light and have that true fellowship with him. And so in this lesson here, it pours that out for us. So then we can overcome the trespasses. We can get past things. That's the beauty of being a Christian. We can do what the world cannot do. But if we don't do, then we're just like the world. They can't see a difference. And you'll see people say, well, all Christians are just a sinner. A Christian is not just a sinner. A Christian is one who has been converted. A Christian is one who has been transformed. A Christian is one who is conforming his life to the life of Christ. A Christian is the one who always sacrificed himself for the good of Christ. Remember what Paul said, that we have to present ourselves a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto who? Unto God. Because that's who we're aiming for. We're aiming to please God and not man. And the world ought to see us in that vein. Those people aim to please God. They don't operate like we operate. You ain't gonna see them out snatching each other weave out. My wife watched the crazy show with those housewives of, where they from, baby? Yeah, her Atlanta Housewives. And boy, I tell you what, I said, I go to sleep. I said, I can't take it. I said, they can't even call themselves housewives because most of them divorced. If they can't get along in their own house, how are they gonna try to get along with each other? They can't get along with their own husband and family. Then they're gonna try to be housewives as a group of women together. And it's just chaos. And I said, and it's the worst image. They bring forth the worst images. And I said, the devil, he's like tossing them in the air. Like, see how I have shredded them. I shredded them. And but they'll invoke God's name. They'll say, oh, let's pray to God. Because like last night, my wife was watching and one of them got sick, said, oh, we're going to pray to God for her. How are you going to pray to God for her? And you just got to cussing the lady out. Talking about how bad a host she is. And, she did the work. She done the work. Now she's in the hospital. So, oh, we so sorry. We just love her. What? You brought this. It's just, but that's how the world thinks. And they see themselves righteous that way. So we as the children of God have to show that there is a demarcating line. There is a difference. There's a markable difference that can be seen between that and the real. Between separating truth from error have to be seen. So I want to appreciate everybody for sharing tonight and participating in this lesson because it's critical to us. If we don't prepare ourselves for restoration, we can't go out and save. And that's the whole process of going through this far because we're getting ready to embark upon the ministry of reconciliation, the ministry of personal work and evangelism. And we're going to encounter all kinds of people. And if we can't start working within our own church family, within our own family in our house, how then do we address other people in the community or when they look at us? And I met a man that, I'm like, and he was telling me, he said, I'm a successful man and I know God's with me. He said, me and my wife, we have very successful business. My daughter she's got her scholarship and she's at Harvard. She's at the best college. My son is at West Point. He's going to be an excellent officer. They're very obedient to us. And there's preachers whose kids are just terrible. How can you even compare us to those kind of folks? So we don't go to nobody's church because we don't need to go to church. We have a righteous relationship with God where we are. And so they assume because the monies they have, the lifestyle they're able to live, the behavior they children, that means they're right standing with God. But they fail to understand. No, none of that. Jesus said, what Isaiah said, all of this is as filthy rags. Your righteousness is as filthy rags. Until you come into that covenant relationship with God, whatever you do can never equate to what Jesus have done. See, they forget about Jesus. They look about, I got this money. Paul told Timothy, and in 1 Timothy 6, he says, some suppose that money is gain. He said they have pierced themselves through with great sorrows, many sorrows. Why? Because they look at their money, their wealth, and say, oh, look, if we were such bad people, how would God bless us to have all this right here? They forget that Satan gives folks that kind of stuff. Satan tried to give that kind of stuff to Jesus, didn't he? But that wouldn't have made Jesus righteous. And so they measure righteousness the wrong kind of way because they don't know. They think they know, but they don't know. And so it's like Yoda said, you have to unlearn what you've learned. The world have learned the way of the devil. They have learned the way of the world. They have to unlearn those things because they see themselves righteous in that. And they think they're righteous in contrast to where God is. They think they're righteous with God. And there is no righteousness there. It's only that illusion that Paul told the Thessalonians about. He said, God is the illusion that you live.